Good evening. Welcome to this very special event. We are very, very happy and honored and pleased to host the first of a series of encounters and events that we, as, let's say, the team from the curatorial team for the next international exhibition of Triennale Milano, the 23rd International Exhibition of Triennale Milano, under the title of Inequalities, are dealing and organizing together with the Fondazione Eni Enrico Mattei. And we are very happy of this collaboration. And to start in this sort of big laboratory of ideas, approaching the international exhibitions. I am Nina Bassoli, curator for architecture, urban regeneration and cities at Triennale Milano, and part of the committee of Triennale Milano and of the 24th International Exhibition together with colleagues here. We are working on the topics since months, but most of all we are happy to start a sort of laboratory including inviting, listening at the most clever, intelligent and contemporary voices of the contemporary debates on the topic of inequalities, which of course cover a series of keywords and themes wide that we will try to discover step by step. Under the idea of building laboratories and exchanges, we really would like to thank the Fondazione Enrico Mattei and Nicola Zanardi, who is helping us in this, and of course Alessandro Lanza and Filippo Tessari, and to thank very much the host of tonight, the Professor Rick van der Ploeg. We are very honored to listen to the first key lecture on the, and help us to approach such a difficult theme as relationship between climate change and economics and the inequalities related to that. And Sergio Vergalli, which deal also with the deep research that the Fondazione is doing, Fondazione Mattei is doing under the topic between energy and inequalities, and Dilenia Romani, who will also help us to deal with the topic. Just a few words on the idea of the laboratory. We produce exhibitions, but we try to use it as a sort of hub for dealing with other themes, and we are very happy that this morning, under this collaboration, a workshop took place with the Politecnico di Milano, design, with Susanna Sancassani, which is really something very important to start a new research and new thoughts under the themes. I don't want to go into the themes because I'm really happy, curious, and excited to listen to this incredible host that we have tonight. And so for the introduction of the evening and the events, I leave the floor to Alessandro Lanza. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will be even shorter if Rick allows me. I will say a few words in Italian just to speed up the process. L'idea di questa collaborazione nasce qualche mese fa tra due istituzioni che ovviamente sono molto diverse tra loro. La nostra è una giovane istituzione, ha solamente 35 anni, la Triennale è un'istituzione costituita tanto tempo fa, però ci sembrava, a me e a qualche altro, ovviamente condiviso con Nicola Zanardi innanzitutto questa cosa, che mettere insieme due istituzioni molto diverse, non si deve dire perché così molto diverse, potesse avere dei vantaggi. E abbiamo deciso di organizzare una serie di 6 eventi, che vedete lì citate insieme alle date in cui avverranno, quindi segnatevele già: Transitions o Transizioni, e oggi generazioni, Zilibotti che insegna a Yale, Distribution, Michael Spence che by the way Premio Nobel, adattamento, Mendelssohn Yale che è andato vicino al Premio Nobel secondo me, cittadinanze Franco Farinelli che è un geografo che sta a Bologna, e Sustainability feedback con lui, che sta in quella strana sigla che è Alta University Economics and Business, non dico sempre. Quindi diciamo, questo è il nostro programma per i mesi a venire, ci porterà fino a dicembre di quest'anno, insieme alla fine del giubileo, e quindi vi invito già da adesso, insomma, a partecipare a questi incontri, perché sono sicuro che saranno tutti di grandissimo livello, come sarà certamente di grande livello l'intervento del professor del Ploeg, al quale do immediatamente la parola, non prima.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I skip in English again, so because I would like to present our host here, today, our guest today, that is Professor Rick van der Ploeg, that is Professor of University of Oxford, University of Amsterdam, and also is a research fellow of CEPR, CZIFO, and the team that used to here. In all this screen, they are everywhere in the moment. And another part of his history is related that he was a former chief of financial spokesman in Dutch Parliament, and State Secretary of Education, Culture and Science in the Netherlands, and Vice Chair of UNESCO World Heritage Committee. About his research for us, for research in economics, environmental and energy economics, is very important for us because I wanted to give you some ideas. It's in the top ranking in the world. We have a ranking. We have a different fields of ranking. We have, for example, energy economics, resource economics, environmental, in the top 10. So to give you the importance, for me, is very proud that this is a very honor that you are here. And so we start with the first question to introduce the debate, so the dialogue, more than the debate, between Ilenia Romani, that she's a researcher in FEEM, PhD student at University of Operations, also a future postdoc at MIT. So, and a dialogue between different generations also, and so we speak about inequalities also related to different generations. So the first question is open. So the idea is if you look at the different words that we have looked at before, that is adaptation, transition today, we have also generation, so distribution. The idea is which are the main elements that could combine all this in the main theme, main topic that is related to inequalities. Because behind it is this inequality, that is the main topic that could be behind everything. And I think also this will be a problem with respect to the future. Okay, we can start with this. Rick, so, I give you.
So these words are very well chosen. So when I think of those words, I see inequality as a big thing. So if you want to have a green transition, then if you look at global warming, that really hurts the poorest countries most. So we've done the emissions. My mom comes from Manchester. That's where the Industrial Revolution started. It was coal-fired, lots of coal-fired power stations. That's when all the big emissions started. So since the late 19th century, emissions have gone up and up and up, and the last 10 years have gone up a lot. So the rich West and the rich North, they've been causing the emissions, and the poor South, they get all the shit. They get the bad things. They get the droughts, they get the deserts, and they get all the problems, the storms and things like that. It will happen in Europe as well, and as we now see the fires in California as well. But it is an inequality issue. And then secondly, if we wanted to do some policies for climate, you may want to cast your eye back to Macron, President of France. He tried to kind of price carbon. He said, we're going to do it. He's a former investment banker. He didn't think about politics, I think. And it was, the protests were all over. They called the yellow vests. And they were protesting. They say, this climate policy is not for us, it's for the rich people. The reason is that a lot of these carbon pricing are what we call regressive. They hit the poor more than they hit the rich. So climate policy is always more painful. And then at the same time, you ask people to move at home from a gas-fired central heating to maybe a heat pump or solar panels. If you're a professor or a notary or even an architect, you can afford it. If you're poor, you cannot afford it. So you cannot afford to adapt. So if you're living in if you have a terrible car, very old, very, very polluting, you get hit with the taxes, but you don't have the money. You just cannot borrow the money. You can't even go to a bank and say, get me a little electric car. So really, the whole green revolution, the green transition, is one about inequality. Then the second one, and I will say it briefly because these words are important, is another theme which Professor Zilibotti will address, is about generations. We have younger generations, we have very old generations. I'm on the way out, she's on the way in. And now the problem is, when you do climate policy, you ask people to make sacrifices. So I particularly ask the young to make sacrifices, and by doing it they will have to change to more expensive forms of energy. You ask businesses to do it as well, but then future generations will benefit from it. Maybe people who are not born yet. So then really, when we think about generations, we want to think of generational welfare. So I think what we should think is of a climate policy. It's not first pass, it's not, and have you heard of the word optimal? You just say, I'm sorry, that's not the way it is. You want it to be politically, to get it across the line. You want to have it to be politically across the line, that there are no generations who lose out. So I might have to run up a bit of government debt, so that I can transfer money from these future generations that benefit from your sacrifices, so that I can get it across the line and get political majorities. Secondly, I have to compensate the poor. I have to help the poor, that they don't see climate policy as a policy for the rich. Then one more theme and then I will stop, and I think that was Professor Mendelssohn from Yale, that was on adaptation. I'm half Dutch. My father was from Rotterdam, my mother from Manchester. So we in Holland, we know very well the idea of adaptation. Holland would not exist without dikes. We're all poldering. So one of the big issues is really, how do you get your seawalls? How do you get your poles? How do you get your defenses, your dikes? How do you get them? How do you change your crops, that your crops are heat resistant? You have to go on dialogues with artists, architects. I've done a lot of that with architects, with Rem Koolhaas, who's a Dutch architect. We talked a lot. How you can make houses that are flood-proof. Maybe houses on sticks. Maybe cleverer solutions. And so we need the creative power of artists, and under artists I include architects, of course. So that's to solve the problem of adaptation. So adaptation is, so we have two things. We want to try to avoid the global warming. So you want to reduce down emissions, and if you reduce emissions you get less global warming. But also, we are losing the game. We've already violated the targets of Paris. We are already over 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we are really already doing badly. So at some point the question comes, how can we live with it? How can we adopt the climate change? For some countries, I have PhD students who work on island economies. These island economies, they may not just be around. So sometimes there's a choice. Do we give it back to the sea, or do we protect it? So I'll give you one example, and I will give the microphone, pass it on. Maybe what's one of the biggest cities, the second biggest city in the world, is perhaps Jakarta. Jakarta is in Indonesia, it's the capital, and it's been flooding for centuries. And it's many people live there. So there they've got the biggest investment project on the planet. The biggest investment project, and much bigger than Venice, is they put a big wall all the way in the sea, all the way around Jakarta. They've already taken part of Jakarta. The government just made a new city higher up. These are things, and it's the biggest investment project. It's not billions, it's trillions amount of money. Investment funds, World Bank, lots of people have put money in Jakarta, but Jakarta is only one. Like Jakarta, think of it, all the busyness of economic activity takes place in exciting cities. Where are the exciting cities? They are ports, they are on the sea, and it's those cities that are exactly most vulnerable. So that's it's an architectural challenge, it's an engineering challenge, it's a design challenge, but that's something we have to deal with. And that's also part of the green transition. And again, if you're a country like Holland, you're rich, If you're a country like Norway, you're rich, you can actually plan ahead for 20, 30, 40 years ahead as we do. We have part of Rotterdam, where my brother lives, it's 20 meters below the sea level. No problem. If you're in an African country, forget it. And they have to deal with other things like heat stress, deserts growing up, and people then will migrate and they will move. And of course, if you don't solve it, they will of course migrate to Europe. And then at a scale much bigger than we've seen in the last 20 years. So I think all these words that you've chosen, transition, generations, distribution or inequality, they're absolutely crucial. And none of these, if you talk about that last word, sustainability, it's a very much overused word. It needs to tackle all those other words before you can even start again to talk about sustainable. It's not good having firms that think, in the old days there was a famous Nobel Prize winner called Milton Friedman. All the right wing, they love him. And he's a very, very clever intellect, but he's dead already. But he used to say, the only thing firms need to do is to look at their earnings. They should just maximize the value of the firm. Now there are other Nobel Prize winners, not only Michael Spence, but Oliver Hart and others. And they've been arguing that no, firms, they should have social objectives, because if they're sustainable, they look at not at the short run, which most firms look at, but they take a much longer run perspective. So policies of government should be focused on having more longer run perspectives. There are other popular economists turning up, like Mariana Mazzucato, maybe you've heard of her, who's also telling you that story, and she's right. Thank you.
Thank you. Lots of food for thoughts for sure. I would like to focus a little bit more on the nexus between inequalities and climate change and the energy transition, and try to connect these concepts together. I would like to start the discussion with a statement that everyone can agree on. That is, climate change and global warming are global problems that affect us all. And so on these we can all agree. In economics, when we have a global problem, we call this a global negative externality. It's a situation in which everyone benefits from a reduction in global warming, for example. And in this vignette, let's imagine that the reduction in global warming is keeping the bike moving. Now let's ride the bike all together. But then we all want to ride the bike, but we would prefer to shift the costs of riding the bike to someone else. It's a cost riding the bike. I need to put some effort, burn energy, sweat a little bit. Everybody can act like the man whistling and not pedaling, and still enjoy from the bike that keeps moving. No? They are moving all together. Someone is working, someone is not. And this is exactly like the concept of negative externality, and it applies very, very much to global warming and the fight against it. And the guy who's not pedaling but is benefiting from the bike ride, in economics we call him the free rider, quello che ha una free ride, la corsa gratuita, lo scroccone. And in my view, it's one of the main reasons why we are currently failing to tackle climate change effectively as a global problem. And of course, like as Rick mentioned, inequalities play a huge part in this. The greater the inequalities between the bikers, the more difficult it is to ride all together. So if someone is very weak, if someone is pedaling very strong, we need some coordination, we need some balance. If someone is not pedaling at all, no, the more inequalities we have, the more challenging the fight becomes. So I think, yeah, like this concept of inequality is very important. And as you said already, there are several types of inequalities. We can have within country inequalities, so the difference between poor people and rich people, but also between countries inequalities like the one that you can see here, rich countries and poor countries, but also a third type of inequality that's very, very important if we're talking about climate change is intergenerational inequalities. Because climate change is a long-term problem, and so we need to have both the short-term approach and the long-term approach. And Professor van der Ploeg has been working extensively on public finance and environmental economics since 1986, and when thinking about public finance and inequalities, the first government instrument that comes to mind is taxation. People in general do not like taxes. Economists love them because it's a very straightforward form of redistribution. It's a simple tool, and it's not a case that a lot of environmental policies takes the form of taxation, like the very famous carbon taxes. In this case, what happens? Basically, governments calculate the cost of emitting a ton of carbon in several ways. The most popular one is the social cost of carbon calculations, and businesses, firms, private, have to pay a tax for every ton of carbon that they emit. In this way, if we price carbon, we force the economy to take into account, to internalize, we say, CO2 emissions, the cost of pollution. And if businesses have to pay for the carbon, they want to emit less. They will, and ultimately, we hope pollution is going to be reduced. In theory, this seems very straightforward. In reality, of course, it's much more complex. So, the first key point on which Rick, you've worked a bit on is what do I do with the revenues from the carbon tax? What's the best way in which I could invest those? You've worked a bunch on the double dividend hypothesis. I will try to explain it in simple terms, but we can have a discussion on this. Basically, the theory says that environmental taxes can, first of all, benefit the environment for the reason that I've just explained. I reduce pollution, and this is the first dividend. But also, they can lower the economic costs of the tax system, and this is the second dividend. What's the idea? If I tax, the government gets additional revenues. If I use these additional revenues, I can lower the other taxes from, that is for example, labor or capital markets. And so in this way, the overall tax burden can be optimized. Of course, there are several ways in which this could be done. And so my question is the double dividend hypothesis actually true? Can it be the case? And under which conditions instead could it be realistic? And according to your opinion, what would be the optimal way or a good idea for allocating these carbon tax revenues?
So thank you very much. This was a very good lecture. So thank you very much. I couldn't have put it better. So I just want to, I will answer your question, but one thing to be absolutely clear, it doesn't matter at all whether you do a ton of emissions in Timbuktu, in London or in Nigeria, and it doesn't matter if you did it 10 years ago, now or in 10 years time. It doesn't matter when or where you do it, they all contribute the same amount to global warming. It's called perfect mixing. Very different to say pollution, noise pollution is only local, and that is very much where it is. If you have fine particles, also a form of pollution, it matters where it is. CO2 is the only one which mixes immediately, so it is really the true planetary bad effect of emissions. So that's why Lord Stern, I'm just repeating what you said, Lord Stern called it the biggest externality on the planet, the biggest market failure on the planet. Because if only all these people are emitting stuff and they don't have to pay for it, so it's a question of property rights. So imagine I'm sitting here and I take out of my thing here a big Cuban cigar. You've got a beautiful clothes on, you don't want them to get dirty. So do you have the right to clean air, or do I have the right to smoke? Under Trump, I would have the right to smoke. But normally we say, no, you have a right to free air. So there are two approaches. We either say clearly, we mandated. This is they call that like it's like the Coast approach. Ronald Coast, a professor of Chicago. Or we say the Pigou approach, it's the Cambridge professor, where you price it. So if I smoke, I have to look at all the damages I do to all of you, and I have to then pay that price, and then it will stop me smoking a cigar, or at least smoking much less. So now the question is, in the old days, in the 80s, when I wrote all these papers on double dividend, everybody said, look, we have unemployment, and we have climate, we have high taxes on labor, we have low taxes on pollution. Then people said, look, we're going to put higher taxes on pollution, and then they can use the revenue to lower the taxes on labor. And then they say that's great, because then we get more jobs and a cleaner environment. So the idea is you tax polluting activities, you tax emissions, use that money to lower the taxes on labor, and then you get more jobs and more pollution. That research showed that that's not true. In actual fact, it's a big mistake people made, and I'm proud that I was one of the people who proved that, but I did it together with a guy called Lance Bovenberg, but that's now realized that that's not right. But now we have a different issue. It's not, unemployment is not the issue. It is unemployment, but the big issue is inequality. So really is what I would like to use, so my recent research is that I look at maybe 2 million households in Germany or a couple of million households in England, and I try to find policies so that as little people as possible, as few people as possible are badly affected by the climate policy. So the way you do this, as you already said, you put on price, you price carbon, everybody pays it, very bad for the poor people because they consume more of these dirty products. So then you give some of the money back to these people. So if you Google something called climate dividend, that's a big movement. Millions of people are arguing. It's like a thing they argue for climate dividends. So what you give is you give everybody a dividend, a kind of a basic income, and you give it to people like that, and you give it that benefits poor people more than rich people. So they've done that in Alaska. People in Canada are talking about it, and I think it will be a good thing in Europe as well. And you have to do that before you do the climate policy, so that people know, yes, you're getting this money, but so you're going to, I mean, if you then change if you don't change your behavior, you stay dirty, you will lose a bit of money. But if you change a bit green, you benefit. So that's what you have to do to make sure that it's not a story for the rich people, but that poor people don't get badly affected. Secondly, you need to use some of the revenue to subsidize people. They have these APEs, is that what you call them, these dirty cars, these diesel cars and things like that. Get them out of these things, get them to an electrical car. That's too expensive for most people to buy, so you have to say, I buy up your dirty car, and here you have 5,000 euros, just take it off the road, and here you have a subsidy for a green car. That's the fastest way to get emissions down in a place like Italy. But again, you're helping the poor who don't have the money to be green. If they're average people, say they have an average, well, you probably earn a lot, but people say who earn a bit more, maybe earning 60,000 euros a year or something like that, 50,000 euros a year, then they may have the money, but they don't. But at least they can borrow. And if they can't borrow, you can give them cheap loans. So you want to give the money to the poorest people, but people who are a bit richer, then you can help them with free loans, and the rich people can do it themselves. So that's a policy which now countries are experimenting with, and that works very well. What you also need to do is that many of these transition things get cheaper and cheaper the more you roll it out. So I was involved again with architects, I have to say. You start with take a part of a city, you build a new house and say, look, we're going to make these houses zero emissions, net zero. So energy label A+++. So you can do that, heat pumps and everything like that, solar panels, and then you say, okay, and then the first time you do it, you might have to pay about 60,000 euros per house extra. But then another district of the city or another city wants to do it, and it gets cheaper because they've learned how to do it. Then it's maybe 40,000 euros per house. We found after 3, 4, 5 years, both American evidence and Dutch evidence, and now British evidence as well, then it goes down to about 5 or 10,000 euros. And then it's economical. Then actually even poor people would be stupid not to do it. But then they don't have the money, the 10,000 euros, so you have to loan it to them. Give them a loan at a very low rate of interest, so they get some responsibility. And what you see is happening quickly. People love it. People don't like living in cold homes. Of course, it's maybe less relevant for Italy, but it's particularly relevant for Northern Europe. And the same thing is true for the adaptation measures. So how you, if you deal with farms in Italy, maybe producing wine or olives, you have to think of new crops. So in Holland we have a university called Wageningen, and they have the agricultural university. They are really good at inventing new crops. You have to experiment, machine learning helps a lot with that. To get crops that are safe, but are can cope better with hot climates. That's another form of adaptation. So the government has to help it, take an active role, where government, they finance basic R&D at universities, and they make sure that they work with private companies for the benefit of the people of the continent. So that's the way I think about it.
I was thinking also the way in which we design cities, like I was thinking about the public green, the concept of the English style, the British style grass, like right now it's not sustainable anymore, no? Having these beautiful layers of grass, because in Italy, especially in the summer, they get totally yellow, because it's bird grass, no? And now they're inventing new type, not inventing, but testing new different plants that we could use, no?
So when I walk through Milan, I walk quite a bit, I think of it as a stone city. It's not a green city. And like even London, however bad you may think of it, is full of green parks. So if you live on a park, it's known that it's much cooler. The best form of air conditioning is underneath a tree. But secondly, also it gives you shade. And thirdly, it captures all the dirty particles from cars. So trees are our friend. Trees keep you cool, trees keep you clean, and they give the shade thing as well. So they're really healthy. They're really, so, and then also, I'm not even talking about the mental health. If people can walk in parks, they're happy. And it is indeed right what you say, that people have been experimenting with different types of grass and different types of parks that manage. But it's normal for grass to go brown in a heat wave, but it comes back immediately. So we got these new grasses, they go brown as a form of protecting themselves when it's 35 degrees. Then they go back to 24 degrees, it goes green straight away. So we've made a lot of progress on that. And I think the design of cities is not only about parks, it's also cities. Now we've got the new metro from the airport to town, but it's in England, you have to make a city that people can walk everywhere. A city should not depend on cars. Ideally, there's a lady called Jacobson, what's her name again, the famous lady? Jacobs, yeah, and she would of course say that the city is primarily for walkers, then maybe cyclists, and cars have the lowest priority. And then if you can then walk from neighborhood to neighborhood, European cities are better than American cities, but they can still improve. And then another thing we need to learn, from Jane Jacobs was her name, another thing we need to learn is that the way we make use of the wind. So if I go to the Caribbean, I have many friends from the Caribbean, the Dutch Caribbean, but also British Caribbean. It's interesting to see how houses are built on the wind direction. So the wind comes in, and they just don't have any air conditioning. It's all done naturally, and it flows through the house. So we have to think more about making use of houses to keep them warm and building them under the sun. Not have these quick for profit building organizations, project developers who just want to make money as quick as possible. No, think cleverly about how you can make best use of the wind, the sun, and the trees to get a sustainable house. And I'm happy to say that I've been to various architectural biennale where that's an important theme, so it's on their thing. But then politicians need to pick it up as well, and particularly local politicians.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. And so, I mean, we've been talking about within country inequality, within city inequalities, and I think now it would be interesting to talk a little bit more about the intergenerational inequality concept. We've already said a couple of things about it, but the way I see it, like as a concept, intergenerational equity, it means sacrificing current interests to protect future needs, in a sense. And so the way we prioritize these interests and needs shapes our concept of sustainability, and of course it shapes our agenda. For example, pension debt. It's a major issue for Italy, especially for other countries too. It's being passed down, pension debt is being passed down to my generation and those that follow, of course. The same is true for ecological debt. And both of them depend really on the importance that we are giving to the future. If we don't care, that is not a problem. The importance that we give to our future, let me clarify it, relative to our present. And to me, it looks like sometimes we are acting in this way. I'm sorry if the quality is not fantastic, but yeah, handing off the planet to the next generation, like, and an adult is kicking the kid with a heart-shaped balloon. Not very gentle, the message. And but apart from this, I'd like to ask if you can comment on this very interesting fact in my mind. So let's start from the concept of the social cost of carbon. There is no consensus, obviously, on the value of the social cost of carbon. But different administrations in the world use it as a benchmark to evaluate climate policies. For instance, some years ago, the Obama administration set the social cost of carbon to $53 a ton of carbon. So to them, a reduction in a ton of carbon was worth $53. Not a lot, but still something. Then Trump, when he was elected the first time, he reduced it to $1 per ton of carbon. Then Biden administration set it back to 51 something, so very close to the level of the Obama administration. And now Trump wants to eliminate it, like zero. The benefit of reducing a ton of carbon to him is worth $0. Clearly not very future-looking, let's say. Yeah, exactly. And this means that we are valuing zero, the reduction in the potential reduction in carbon emissions. And a similar reasoning can be done if we look at the discount rates. In Italiano I tassi di sconto. The discount rate expresses the time value of money. Investors use a discount rate to figure out how much future cash is worth today. A higher discount rate means that money in the future will be worth less than it is today. So in other words, I'm not betting on the future. And as you can imagine, the reasoning is very parallel to the one of the social cost of carbon. Obama at the time applied a 3% discount rate, Trump increased it to 7%, Biden brought it back to 3%, and now of course Trump wants to raise it again. So I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on this, on the intergenerational implication of these choices, not necessarily just looking at the US, but you know.
No, so I'll answer both questions. So the first one I'll rephrase as when is a country better off over time? If I compare 2025 with 2027, when are we better off? Most economists will think, well, the GDP grows, we're better off, or GDP per person grows. If that grows, then we think we're better off. We know that that is wrong. We know that we should adjust, we should say about a genuine, a real version, a real GDP, and the proper version of GDP should correct for the pollution. So if we have pollution damages, we should take GDP minus the pollution from SO2, minus the pollution from CO2, minus the cost of pollution of CH4, minus the amount of water we've used up from the soil, minus the nitrogen damages we do. So we have to collect all the damages. If you own natural resources, you might have cut down trees, you have to deduct it. If you've taken oil or gas out of the ground, you have to deduct it. So we know, again from a Nobel Prize winner like Ken Arrow, but also a famous guy, Sir Parvati Gupta, that in actual fact we only get better from year to year if the corrected GDP per person grows. So the GDP after you've taken account for all these damages. And the way you price those damages is things like the social cost of carbon. So that's why it's important. So that's why it's part of the same question. But if I look at, and this is called real national accounting, accounting for all these environmental damages, also the health damages. If you're doing growth and you're causing health damage, you have to subtract it as well. So there's a big industry, I've written many papers myself, but the World Bank actually does this. They call it real genuine saving, genuine GDP. And they've deducted damages done to climate, damages due to fisheries, damages to forests, and all those costs can be deducted and should be deducted. Now, so first, people like Trump, we are back to authoritative dictatorships in America, and we are back to the times of, well, he wants to be like Putin and the Chinese, but really he's like King Leopold II of Belgium, who kind of raped the Congo from the natural resources. That's what Trump wants to do now as well. He doesn't care about pollution, he doesn't care for any of these corrections, so he just wants to rape other people's grounds. He says, look, if you're Greenland, fuck you, I need your critical materials, I need your resources, I'm just going to grab it. It won't be long before Trump goes to Africa and say, here you have an airport, now give me all your natural resources. He had the audacity to go to Zelensky and says, listen carefully, Trump said, you started the war to the Ukrainians. That's what he says. Publicly we laugh, but it's scandalous. This is like King Leopold II of Belgium again, the biggest, not a fascist, but the biggest authoritarian dictatorship, like Putin. And it's really at the expense of the economy. So that's what he's doing. Somebody like Biden was a decent chap, boring but decent. So he wants to correct for all these things. He said, why does he want low discount rates? Ethical discount rates, we call them. Because then you count problems in the future, they weigh more today. Why does Trump want a very high discount rate? If you have a problem of the climate in 2050, if you have a 7.5% discount rate, it's nothing today. Once you discount it, it's all gone. So by saying a discount rate of 7.5%, Trump says, don't worry about the climate, don't worry about nitrogen pollution, don't worry about the water levels going down, don't worry about the biodiversity, because we've got a discount rate of 7.5%. It's almost criminal. So then how do you price it? So it happens to be one of my expertise. So I actually think that there's a paper in Nature, one of the top scientific journals, they come with an estimate of $200 per ton of CO2. That's a more reasonable estimate. I think it could be much higher. So my expertise is that you don't only count in the damages that you expect, but also that if we go from global warming from 1.5 degrees relative to pre-industrial temperatures to 2 degrees. So now we 1.5, if we go at 1.5 degrees higher, the number of extreme weather events goes up by a factor 6 or 8. So those storms, those floods, those droughts, they occur 6 times more frequent, and they will also be more intense. The damages per storm will be higher. So that means that I think the social cost of carbon should include the fact that if you have higher temperature, you get a bigger risk, a bigger intensity of these extreme weather events, extreme climate disasters. So if you allow for that, and if you also allow for the fact that with higher temperature, we get climate tipping. Have you heard of tipping the climate? So you may get an accelerated melting of the Greenland ice sheet, or of other ice sheets, or you may get the Siberian tundra, and then all the methane will be released, and then you get a boom, 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 boom. It goes really, really very fast. It's already happening. Because now you get, for example, these ice mountains are melting in the North Pole. So what happens? The water becomes more fresh water. The sea becomes less salty. So we have this Atlantic Gulf Stream that's driven by temperature differences, but also salt differences. Salt goes to the bottom of the oceans. If you know 15-year-old kind of physics, you can see you can get a conveyor belt where the hot water goes from Mexico along the south coast of England all the way to the North Pole. It keeps on going. But if that water becomes sweeter there in the North Pole, it stops. So what you get is also a risk of cascading tipping points. So if you have one tipping point melting icebergs, you may get that there are other tipping points that the Gulf Stream stops. So we now, with higher temperature, you get these increased risks. If you price these in, that estimate of $200 per ton of CO2 rises to about 1,000. So it's not 0, not 1, not 50, not even 200, but 1,000. So that now people are saying, there are some papers out, not mine, but some other papers, a guy from Berkeley and a guy from MIT, and they say that even America has unilateral, it's so high now the cost of carbon, that it's even pays for them that the damages to America alone are high enough for them to do it, to take action. So if they are so high, you don't need international collaboration, because the costs are that high that even on your own would take action. If they were $200 or $50 per ton of CO2, it's only interesting to take action together. But if they're that high, like $1,000, which people are thinking they are nowadays, then an individual country like the Netherlands or like America, they should do it on their own. It's big enough and important enough for them to do it on their own. Of course, the biggest threat to the climate and the green transition is this new regime of rogue dictators. They have all been elected. So don't forget that Putin has been elected, even China has been elected. Trump has been elected. But what they're now doing, and there's no other word for it, is to basically weaponize the state against the people.
Even Hitler was elected.
Sorry?
Even Hitler was elected.
Even Italy, it's out of the old playbook. So they're repeating what dictators have done in the past. It's not good to compare them with Hitler. That's not what I want to do. But it's a takeover by big tech to grab as much money from the people as possible with the biggest pollution possible. So Musk is just interested in those critical materials for his green cars, for his electrical cars. Trump is just saying, be grabbing things and the people themselves. He wants to make of Gaza, whatever you think of Gaza, say I'm going to make it the Riviera of the Middle East. It's obscene. It's to be honest, and then I'm going to evacuate 2 million people to Jordania and things like that. It's obscene. It is people laugh, but people should realize it's always the case. If you're old enough, sorry, but if you know that they mean it. Anyway, this is also the biggest problem for Europe, because Europe has now become irrelevant. We're a greying continent. We're behind in productivity growth. Look what Draghi has said, but we also no longer have the protection of America. We were dependent on Russia for gas up to just before the crisis. We had to get rid of that, and now we have to learn to stand on our own feet. But the help is not going to come from America. We have to do it now within Europe alone. And the big problem is that we lack political leadership. In France, Le Pen may take over. So Macron is not strong. In Germany, we have the AfD, the more right-wing fascist parties. They may not be the biggest, but it means that Germany and France are normally the engine, whereas now you see that the stronger positions are actually, funnily enough, Italy and the UK, particularly Keir Starmer. But it means that Europe is fragmented, it's politically lagging behind. From a demographic point of view, we're getting less and less people. Population of Italy will decline by a quarter, and we're in a more unfriendly world, with Putin on the east and America on the west. America says to Ukraine, we will help you, but you give half your natural resources to us. Which is quite, that's why I said King Leopold, I wasn't joking. It is exactly like that. So then, if you said to me, are we kind of hopeful? It's difficult. It has become a lot more difficult, all in one month. So sorry, apologies for this little discussion.
Just a simple consideration that, of course, I share your opinion about current policy and being part of a couple of IPCC reports that we try to figure out how the world can be, etc., etc., and we feel really sick about the situation. And the simple story, which is the ironic part of history, that the first politician that say that GDP is not the only good measure of health was Bob Kennedy, which, by the way, is the father of the current Minister of Health of Trump, which was really embarrassing during the COVID story, and now is the Minister of Health, and God knows what will be the result at the end. This is a part, the ironic and sad part of the story. Yeah.
Indeed.
Agreed. Well, thank you for the comment. My meme wasn't very optimistic, and I guess your comment was very much along the lines of that.
It's a call for leadership. It's a call for a new type of leadership. You look pretty good. We need young people to come in, take over politics, attack vested interest, and say, look, we need new leadership for this continent. Many people of my generation, being a politician, they screwed up. We've made ourselves dependent on America for our defense. You remember, you're old enough to remember Yugoslavia? That had to be solved not by us, it was solved by the Brits and the Americans. That's very embarrassing in the very deep sense of the word, but it also means that you're really a continent that can't look after yourself. So if I tell that to my own politicians, I'm a Labour Party politician, they all they're interested about is, income of the low people and things like that. These are not important issues of the time. They really now have a raison d'etre question. How does Europe survive in the way we've learned to? And it's been threatened. I'm for sure, I think that Russia will attack the Baltic states. If they do it a la Trump, it'll be next. And Trump says, okay, you're not defending yourself, your problem. So we are, for young people, we have to think about how we're going to do this. And then when you look at our defense expenditures, for decades they've been ignored. And I'm a left-wing guy, I'm a de sinistra, but I think you need to have some defense or some credible things, but we've ignored it. We've ignored talking about it, and that's bad. Yes, so apologies.
Yeah, no, one of the tricky points that we mentioned a couple of times of this new world order is the importance of resources. Since 2008, you've been the research director at the Oxford Center for the Analysis of Resource-Rich Economies. At that time, discussion on resource-rich economies was predominantly focused on oil-producing nations. Now, particularly in 2008, we have the mortgage prime crisis, the oil crisis. The oil prices plummeted from a high of $147 per barrel in July to just $32 per barrel in December. Today, oil and gas remain highly relevant after the Ukraine war, but not only. And also the focus has broadened to a wider range of natural resources, such as precious metals, but also critical minerals, which, by the way, are the topic of my PhD thesis. And a structural paradox, yeah, there we go. this is a very nice mining video from a copper mine in Utah, in the US. A structural paradox emerges from this natural resource wealth. It's the so-called resource curse. In Italian is la maledizione delle risorse. And this phenomenon occurs when countries that are rich in non-renewable resources, such as oil, but also lithium, nickel, copper, cobalt, any non-renewable resource, these countries sometimes fail to harness the full economic potential of this natural wealth, and they remain trapped in stagnant growth, high inequalities, social problems, and so on and so forth. In 2011, you published a paper titled Are Natural Resources a Curse or a Blessing? And after some years, this is exactly the same question that I would like to ask you. Are natural resources, whether oil, gas, critical minerals, a curse or a blessing?
It's still a very relevant question. So what you see that countries that are extremely rich in oil or gas or coal even, or asbestos when it was still legal, then these countries, you'd think they are richer, that the income per capita people will be richer. In actual fact, and that they will grow faster. But when you look at the data, correct for all the other usual suspects, you find that those countries actually have very bad growth performance and their income per capita is lower. So that's, in a sense, is a curse. So and what are the reasons? So one reason is something called Dutch disease. Holland had a lot of gas, so you're selling that stuff abroad. So that means that people want to buy your gas. So that means that your currency becomes more expensive because everybody's trying to buy it. So if Nigeria sells oil, then their currency, everybody wants to buy Nigerian currency, their currency becomes more expensive. So that means the country becomes less competitive. It's more difficult to export. So what you see, those countries with a lot of resource exports, they get an overvalued exchange rate, and then they find that a lot of industry goes very badly. And that's one important reason. But there are other reasons. Typically in countries with a lot of natural resources, people forget about cost benefit. I remember I was a member of parliament and we had to decide what to do with all the gas money. So then they said, let's put 10 billion in a pot, in a fund. And then, of course, everybody thought it was free money. So then everybody said, I know a bridge from somewhere to nowhere. I know another road from somewhere to nowhere. And then everybody started, there was no cost benefit, it was like it was free. So you got a lot of bad, so we have roads and bridges which are hardly ever used. They should not have been built. So people become less, they don't do cost benefit analysis anymore. They waste money. Thirdly, you see that countries with a lot of oil and gas, they become corrupt. There's a huge evidence, huge political science literature that countries with a lot, and even in Holland, when I was a member of parliament, I got offered lots of bribes. The money is not money in your pocket, but you get say like, don't you need a car? I said, no, I have a cycle. But then you get offered like a showroom model Mercedes, which was maybe 200,000 euros. You can have it for 15,000. And it happens all the time. So of course I said, no, I don't like cars, but still. So that is corruption. And then you get, and then what you see is, of the generals I know from Nigeria, I know 4 generals, and I know their daughters. They go to these expensive British schools. These British schools, they cost maybe 100,000 euros per year. As a general, you can't afford it. If you have 2 children go to these schools, it's just money you cannot afford. They send them to RADA, or a ballet school, or a theatre school, similar cost of money. No way they can afford a house in Kensington or in Belgravia in London, where these houses, minimum house costs 3 or 4 million. How can a civil servant, a director general or a general, how can they afford that? It is because they steal the money. So every time they shell us, our companies, they facilitate the corruption which is going in these countries. A country I know quite well is Suriname. I love it. I have many dear friends. Bouterse was a corrupt criminal. His son was a drugs dealer, and they had this very deal with a Canadian multinational, and they sold all the minerals and the gold as well abroad, but the money didn't reach the people. It went to line the pockets of those people. That you see everywhere. So corruption is the main thing, and you get instability, etc. So that's the reason why the resource cost comes from. Now, does that happen with critical materials? First thing you should notice that they're everywhere. I always thought the lithium is very scarce, but it isn't. It's actually in the ground a lot. But 70% of deposits are under control of the Chinese. The Chinese have from 20-30% have been buying up land all over the world where these rare critical materials are. So the balance of Europe has forgotten about it. Oh, we forgot about it, we'll just buy it from China. But that's from a geopolitical point of view very stupid. So I know America is making it, we don't have it either. So now they're trying to get Greenland for that reason. And maybe other lands they will grab as well. So the first thing is that Europe, we don't have our own supply of critical materials. So we will depend on unsavory regimes, unpleasant regimes. And exactly that if you want to do it, say in Poland or in Portugal or even in Iceland, it's very difficult. Because if you do one of the, you see these mines, they destroy the countryside. So what will happen with this lithium and that type of stuff, you get a lot of pollution. The local people, nobody is going to like it. If they say, do you want electrical cars? Everyone says, yes please. Say, do you want to have in your back garden some lithium production? They say, no, thank you. So they all say, they can go somewhere else. That's the biggest problem in Europe. We're kind of so wealthy that we don't want it. But we don't want to be dependent on other countries, so we have to find a way of doing it safely without hurting our populations. It's a challenge, it can be overcome, but that requires thinking. So it's interesting that Europe has only got their act together in the last 2 or 3 years. There is now, you know this better than me, there's a Critical Minerals Act, so maybe we'll do it. So I think it's too small for it to have real resource person to be really corrupt, but what you will see is the pollution aspect, and what you will see that dictators, or let's call it like the new King Leopolds of this day, they will try to go to those countries and get it by force. And if they can't get it by force, they'll do a deal with the local politicians. You say, you get a couple of million, I take it for very cheap, and nothing goes to your people. So in that sense, definitely will be a resource first.
And also about different environmental protections that are in place. For example, in Europe as well as in the US, there are very stringent regulations about mining activities. Yeah. Like in Italy, we have some interesting deposits of uranium and titanium, but they are in natural parks. You can't touch them. Like it's you can't touch them, so they are from a extractive economics point of view totally useless. But at the end of the day, you want to preserve the environment. While the way China is behaving in Africa, they are, for example, they are disregarding this a little bit, at the expense.
Yeah. And Trump has now already done official decrees. Where he says we can drill baby drill. And they can also mine baby mine, and they go in places like Yellowstone Park. They go in the most beautiful places which you would never allow in Europe. So now you get, so this deep state attack is really an attack on any form of regulation. So they won't get business free at the expense of pollution. So you will get, because of Trump, one of the dangers is that we get, and because of China, a race to the bottom. That inevitably will happen in Europe. That we will relax our environmental rules. I'm not in favor, but they say if you don't do it, all the others are doing it. So there's going to be already Trump in 1 month is already starting a race to the bottom in terms of environmental regulations. And that's why, if I then look at you're not my child, so not my grandchild, but if I look at younger generations, I feel sorry for them. I had a more hopeful future when I was your age. I mean, okay, we had the Cold War, we were fighting against the nuclear weapons being stationed in Europe. I remember with John Robinson, the famous economist, going for that. But in the end, we got through it. We old guys, not young, we older guys, we've had a remarkable period of tranquility since the Second World War. Maybe that was more unusual than be lucky. So anyway, so I'm a bit worried about it. But I'm also hopeful that I think you can change politics if you go for it. I mean, if truth is to be told, we could in Europe even become mostly self-sufficient if we wanted to. So, but that just requires a different type of politics. We may be a bit poorer, but we may be more safe, and more secure, and more clean.
Yeah,
but that's not what the politicians are talking about.
Yeah, but I think like the civil movements, like public protesters and everything in Europe and in the US, as long as they are allowed to do so, are doing a very important job. Like I'm thinking in the US, for example, all the indigenous population movements, because it happens to be that a lot of reserves of these critical materials are in indigenous lands, and so there are like organizations and everything that are trying to speak up at least.
But I'm so worried. I am really sorry. I'm a bit more negative. I should go and get some food. But what's happening? That we have in Europe, we have Orban. Orban is the inspiration for Trump. Trump and Orban may be replicated in other countries in Europe. We have Slovakia already. It's already there. And it's already happening in some other states. It may happen in France and Germany. So what these guys are doing, when I say weaponizing the state, they say that this guy here is a nice professor in Brescia, but he's been a bit green. So he's really deluded. So you will get a letter, you're fired. That's exactly what's happening now, or you lose your research grants. So that's what I have many professors now in America, and they tell me they're out of a job. They're just Musk. And why are they out of a job? They've been a bit green, or they've been too much in favor of vaccines. So they're being too critical, so they're out. This guy called Fauci, he's been attacked. His funds have been taken away, his laboratory is under attack. So these populist politicians, and Orban has been doing the same thing for the last 20 years. Last time I was in Budapest, there was the Royal the Academy of Sciences, very prestigious. The best scientists in Europe are there. He just killed it. They had the Central European University, in the hands was financed by George Soros. They killed it, so it had to go to Vienna. And so these populists, anything that's potentially critical, they will drop. So that's also, they also go after people who are in protest movements. So I see already, so they're pro-Israel. I don't care whether you're pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, or in between. But what I do care about it, if you protest against what happens in Palestine, that you're not being put to jail, that you don't lose your job. That's exactly what's happening in America now. So I like the civic movements, but you see, I've been working in Russia for 3 years, and I've seen how these dictators, how they can undermine all these opposition groups, and in the end, people just shut up. You know, if you're old enough, you know this has happened before, and I see it happening. So maybe not killing, but basically weaponizing the state against your enemies, and you're an enemy.
Yeah.
I'm an enemy because you say things they don't like. But if I say, look, the climate is important, all day here, you're trying to cut down my wealthy business of coal and oil and gas. You're trying to stop my business, you're dangerous. Then the next thing Trump will say, I will bet you, within a year he will call people their enemies of the state. And you might remember, some of you, my favorite playwright after Dario Fo. Who's my favorite playwright? Ibsen. Henrik Ibsen from Bergen, from Norway. He has a book, it's a play, if you don't know it, read it, go to it. It's called The Enemy of the People. And what's the enemy of the people? Your green people. And then the brother was the man who was in favor of the pollution. He just dedicated his brother, he said, you're an enemy of the person. And then people believed, and that's what's going to happen. So we shouldn't talk too much about this, but now you mentioned civic groups, they will find it more and more difficult. They'll be locked up. They will go to jail, things like that. It won't be that long. Anyway, so that's why it's even more important to support those groups. Yeah. So since Trump came in, I've quadrupled the amount of money I give to these green activists, just because I know that life is more difficult.
It's, for me, it will be the perfect time to move to the US. for the postdoc at MIT. I'm really doing research on environmental economics. That's
You might find that the place you're going to, he goes to a very famous place on environmental economics, run by a guy called Professor Knittel at MIT. They're elite university, like Harvard. They may be on the eye of the new administration, and they do environment and green, so they are seen to be dangerous. So let's see how it happens. But if somebody can defend the material.
otherwise I come back to Italy.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, Professor. I think I have a ton of other questions, but I would be very, very happy to leave some space if someone from the public. I think we I'll just go around with the microphone.
Yes, good evening. I'm Franco Conticini. I'm an exploration geologist. So we talked about carbon tax, inequality, social sustainability. I would like to try to give some voice to, for instance, 600 million people in Africa that still has no access to energy. Now, I was asking myself and ask ourselves, is it fair, ethical, to ask these people, to apply to these people, the same carbon tax that we apply to rich Europe? Here in rich Europe, we take gas from frack in the United States, we liquefy, producing a lot of CO2, we transport for 7,000 kilometers, and then we overuse the energy that is not really needed for our probably too high lifestyle. This is one thing. One guy in Namibia maybe has no access to electricity at all, and some nice guy in Davos maybe think he's smart because he says, oh, financial institution should not finance whatsoever any new gas development. But maybe Namibia has gas in front of the house with no electricity, and then I believe we should try to differentiate different situations.
I absolutely agree with you. So the answer is yes. So in actual fact, I've got some papers where with about 100 other people, where we make our logical claim that for differentiated treatments, that the poorest countries, of course, you cannot tax them in that way. But what you can do is to help them to, if they are still having some oil and gas reserves, they should learn to diversify, so you should help them to build new energies, maybe hydropower, maybe solar power, so that they get competitive in the long run, otherwise they're not sustainable. I perhaps didn't talk enough about it, but I think that's absolutely crucial. Now you're talking with a proper explorative geologist. I'd like to say something which is a bit not your question. I started a project with Shell. I hate Shell, normally I don't work for Shell. But it's on volcanoes. So this is quite close to Shell, because it's geology. So we go with a helicopter in Montserrat, for example, but also other places. And you go down the volcano and you take a pipette. You know you take out a lot of brine. Brine is the salty fluid. And then we take it to the laboratories, these big things like that, and turns out it's full of things like silver, cobalt, lithium, and some of them are more rich in these green transition materials than others. So sometimes even maybe possibly, this is exploratory research, maybe these old exploration companies, they have the knowledge and know-how for that, more so than for batteries. Maybe there is a source for raw critical materials which is actually fairly easy to do and would help those islands as well. So far, we find a lot of these minerals in the volcanoes around New Zealand, but there's also stuff around Iceland that we've looked at, but it's a potential. So that needs to be investigated, because then you say to these old fossil fuel companies, well, you've got a lot of know-how, guys like you, which can be used for this purpose as well. So that's just as one example where we have to look further than our nose.
Also, also in the Death Valley in California, they have a lot of geothermal plants, and they are already extracting the hot water for geothermals, and they found that that water is very, very rich in these minerals, so that could also be a possibility. There are other questions from the public? Yes.
So good evening, I'm Luca. Thank you very much for the speech. It was very inspiring, but I would like to ask you, because right now I'm not feeling very hopeless about future, because maybe we had a quite pessimistic view, so if you can give us some optimistic news, something good to go home and not, because like what I'm feeling right now is that okay, there is no hope, I can go home and pollute as much as I want because on the other end of the ocean there is Trump, for example, that do not care, so like, why should I care about it? So if you can give us some optimistic view of it and something that we can do and maybe that we are already doing because the technology is improving a lot. For example, cost of batteries is decreasing so much, so maybe if you can give us.
So Lucas, this is very important. Thank you for asking that question. So I'm actually quite an optimistic guy on the whole, but I want to be aware of the dangers to know what I need to do. So I think one, you said technology. You have this thing called Swanson's law or Wright's law. Every doubling of solar panels in use drops the cost between 20 and 40%. The same is true for batteries or for windmills. They get cheaper the more we use them. And the scale at which a solar panel, by which it has dropped the cost, is a factor of thousands. It's now cheaper solar panel than gas or oil, but it's intermittent. So that technology is a source of hope. But you need to help technology that maybe think of those vaccines. We need to do something the same thing with green energies and do that at the European level. I think Europe together is big enough to do their own independent policies if we want to. The Scandinavians are already a bit more ahead, but if we get true political leadership, and maybe the good thing about Trump is that he kicks Europe into action to do it, and that new generation of politicians will come into power and they take action, and I really hope that will happen, and secretly I think it will happen, because all bad things eventually turn, and even all dictators are eventually kicked out. But the problem is that many of these type of guys, they need a war or something like that to kick them out. So if you look long historical history books, you see that happening. But I think the positive thing is technology, younger generations, and that we can do things within Europe. Even if Europe didn't trade with any other country, we could be self-sufficient. It will be more expensive. Maybe we all have 10% less, but we'd be safer and we'd be cleaner and we'd be greener. So I think many younger generation I talk to, they say, I'd rather have that than be dependent on rogue states. So maybe you need to say, be principled and say, well, if I don't trust those guys, so I don't know what kind of telephone you've got, for example, but if you think you're being spied on by the Chinese, or if you think you're keeping dictators in power, then you shouldn't do it. So we have, in Holland, we have rules, that may be a strange story, but if they had guys, they used to go to Thailand and have sex with underage girls. Bad thing. So now, when they come to Holland, they're locked up. They do something in Thailand, they come to Holland and they go to jail. So why not for bankers? Dutch bankers go to Nigeria, or wherever they go. They facilitate corruption. Dutch bankers come back to Holland, they go to jail. So we should think a little bit more how we can get ethics and the economy a bit more together. Definitely more long-sighted, so less short-term, more long-term. Definitely more inclusive, that we don't, what we've let happen in Europe is that these people who vote for right-wing parties are not bad people. They just think that the existing political parties have not delivered to their things. And now, of course, with all these algorithms, we should also think about rules we have, not just against pollution, but also rules we have about truth, what's wrong and what's right. is evidence doesn't matter. So for that you need policies, you need schooling and things like that. I'm pretty hopeful that Europe could be a continent that could be an example. And I think also that after some while, unless Trump exceeds, but you know, it may be rolled back again. I mean, okay, now Italy's got Meloni, but it was worse, a lot worse before. You survived Berlusconi, and so you're still here. But it's the young who need it. They're all old people. So I would be positive, and any support I can give for younger generations to kind of just knock on the doors and say, look, you're doing a rotten job. I'm going to be a member of the European Parliament. I'm going to be Prime Minister. I'm going to be the Minister of Finance. Is a good thing, and I'm not joking. That's what I did when I was young. In my younger days, I was a politician, and I was ideological. I wanted to change matters as well. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you don't succeed. But you really we can do it ourselves when we work together as Europe as a whole. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if for the question, but the idea now is to go to conclusion. So our hope, new generation, new generation is also Europe. That could be an example for the future. So the idea is to maybe if we will be able to compact, so to also to listen to what Mario Draghi said yesterday. So wake up, Europe. We should do this. And I think in any case, the goal will be, so if we have to plan a goal for the long run is exactly to reduce inequality. So if we have some goal for the future, so a target in order to reach, maybe if we try to survive to Trump, as you said, and also to move in a direction. And also we have to answer to I think, we have to do the right thing. So if the point is, okay, me too, this morning I asked you some hope for the future, but I think this cannot stop us in order to do the right thing. No, I understand. In other cases, we are increasing the pollution and so on, but right thing is one direction. I think it comes back in the future. Could come back in the future. No, plus if you look at the history of the European Union, no? European Union started after the Second World War, and as a reaction to the Second World War, in order to the goal was also to we don't want again a war in the same manner, even if now today we have a war very close to Europe, it's not all Europe. So European Union is also a reaction to this, but if we look at the history of European Union, step by step, we have some problems every time because we are different. But in the long run, I think we reach something. I understand there are different positions and so on, but we have a monetary union, and we have also so this call of Mario Draghi, so there is something. So my hope is in this direction. So I would like to conclude also with this one. So something. Okay.
I want to thank you very much, but yes, I think Mario Draghi's report has not been taken up by political leaders. They would do well to do so. It would be well to think about these algorithms. So I use machine learning a lot for my research, but I want it to be ethical. I don't want people to become slaves of an algorithm without them knowing it. So we need to, this Marietje Verschagen, there are other members of the European Parliament who did a lot of work on trying to get it right. Okay, let Europe be different on that than other parts of the world. So the main thing is, we are a continent of science, we are a continent of the, how do you call it again, the enlightenment. Let's not throw it away because of those internet hooligans. And then let's be clean at the same time, green.
Okay, we are perfect on time.